Thursday the 5th of March 2015. Invited guests gather for the opening of two new motorsport displays in the National Motor Museum. As part of the opening event, guests were treated to a discussion between two motorsport icons, Sir Stirling Moss and Murray Walker.
Welcome to you all. It's lovely to see you all here. Welcome to the Collection Centre of the National Motor Museum. My name is Russell Bowman, I'm the Chief Executive here, and just going to do a brief introduction this morning. In the Collection Centre, as I'm sure you know, we're surrounded by the collections of the National Motor Museum that are designated as of its outstanding national and international importance. So that's the reference library, the photographic collection, the film and video collection, the paper archive, the object store, and much more than that. And the team of people who look after that and know so much about it. And in our plans in the museum, we're carrying out a master plan, which we're about 2/3 of the way through, opening a new area each year. And one of our key aims with that was to use really the power and the real range of what we've got in this building to inform and add to and enhance the displays that are in the museum. So hopefully you'll agree when you have a look round today that we've achieved that. Much richer content in terms of the photographs, film, objects and so on in showcases and so on. All of that information we're trying to put there. We can't take all 1.5 million things from here and put them in there, but we take as much as we can. And hopefully that means then that whether the visitors are motoring enthusiasts, as I'm sure everyone here is, and really understand the vehicles anyway, or whether they're just a member of the public who's looking for an interesting day out in the summer and could have gone somewhere else but chooses to come here, hopefully for all of those people, they really get a sort of full and enjoyable experience of the photographs and everything else that we've got in there. We are now today, of course, opening our motorsport elements of the museum. Last year we opened our land speed record gallery about this time last year. Today moving on to two motorsport elements. Motorsport's been a really important part of the National Motor Museum here since, in fact, before it was a National Motor Museum. So when Lord Montagu, who's here, opened the Montagu Motor Museum in 1956, and then the larger Montagu Motor Museum in 1959, motorsport was certainly a significant element of that. You may have seen up on the screen here a photograph of Lord Brabazon opening the second Montagu Motor Museum in 1959. And you could, those of you that recognise, could see from the people who were standing with him, Lord Montagu and others, a number of motorsport luminaries really there at that time, indeed including Sir Stirling Moss, who was actually there at that opening as well. We're delighted to have you here today, Sir Stirling, to open our gallery today and to have a look at, I think you've had a chance to have a look round already, but for everyone to have a look round and for you to open that and answer a few questions. So Stirling, as you know, needs no introduction from me, but it is great to have you here as someone who's involved in so many of those aspects that we're depicting in our galleries. So thank you for coming along. My job really is to introduce the person who's going to be asking the questions, a gentleman with the clipboard here, who equally doesn't need any introduction. So really my job today is completely superfluous, but nevertheless. Murray Walker, you know, of course, as we all do, the voice of Formula One and very knowledgeable on many aspects of motoring, but also a very good friend of Beaulieu over many years, often here, often involved, and in fact, about a year ago, Murray, you were here, weren't you, helping us to open the motorcycle story gallery, which remains dedicated to Graham Walker, Murray's father, who was not only a motorcycle rider, but also the first curator of motorcycles here. And those of you that are observant a little bit later will also be able to press a few buttons and hear Murray tell us about some of the cars that are in our collection. So that's pretty much all from me. I'm just pleased to hand over to Murray Walker and Stirling Moss.
Thank you, Russell. You ready?
I'm ready.
First of all, thank you all for coming. It's a glorious day for it. The object of the National Motor Museum Motorsport Experience is to enable the general public to get an idea of how motorsport has developed since the earliest days. There are all sorts of panels and displays showing them all about that. Now, as many of you will know, some of you may not know, the first Grand Prix was held in France in 1906. Stirling and I are both getting on a bit, but we don't go back as far as that. But what we thought would be a bit of fun and be a bit different today was to talk about some of the constructors, for some of the many constructors, and we can't talk about all of them, for whom Stirling has driven racing cars with such distinction, and some of whose products are actually in the museum. That's what the link is all about. Now then, let's go back a bit, Stirling, to 1948.
Yeah.
When effectively, I think your career began, and it's when my broadcasting career began, coincidentally. Your career began with the 500cc Cooper.
Yep.
Will you tell us something about you've sat in one today?
Yeah, it didn't fit me so well. No, well, the Cooper 500 was the idea of Charles Cooper, actually, and John Cooper, his son. And they brought this car out and had Jap engines were the main thing, because in those days a total engine cost you 70 quid, which was obviously quite a lot of money then. And then as we went on, somebody realised you could get a Norton and put a double knocker Norton in, so there's another 50 quid. And so it became quite expensive running 500s. And I mean, what you've got to realise is at that time, of course, we weren't racing anywhere because in this country you're not allowed to race on the roads, except in the Isle of Man or what have you. But so I drove those at the hill climbs, which was my entry really into motor racing as a whole thing.
Stirling, unless I'm very much mistaken, you drove 13 different types of Cooper in your career. You probably lost...
Really?
Yes, you did, yes. You've probably lost count of all of them. But arguably the greatest of your careers, or certainly one of the greatest of your careers, was Argentina in the Cooper Formula One, where you won the race in most unusual circumstances. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, the problem there, I said to Alf after I think we really needed to stop and put Alf Francis, the chief, my mechanic, or a race engineer as they're known now. And I said to him, look, we're going to have to stop. I mean, there's just no way. And then we did a test to see how quickly you could change, take a wheel off and put another one on with 5 studs. Of course, it was ridiculous, no good at all. So I was faced with a problem that I had to use the one set of tyres on the car. And so we worked out a strategy, and where Alf would come out and signal things, like for instance, as we're coming up to halfway, and I happened to be leading, I was up in the leading group, and then I dropped back on the corners to save the tyres, then close up on the slipstream, and everything was going pretty nicely.
Who are you up against? Who was the competition?
Oh gosh,
Ferrari in the form of...
Ferrari and all that. I'm just trying to think of the name. But Ferrari and Simca Gordini, I think, and quite a lot of. I think they allowed specials. I can't really remember that actually. But anyway, I know I had my Cooper with this thing, and I'm going round, and the tyres, of course, started to wear. I was actually going round the corners as slowly as I could, and then closing up, as I explained, and. But the tyres, when the tyres go down, the first thing that happens, of course, is the tyre gets to the point where there's no tread, or at least it reduces the tread, and then you begin to get lines, which would go across like this, which was obviously the rubber. And then after that, then this is the front tyres, and it's come to halfway race, and I happen to be in the other drivers have they weren't concerned because I'd been going around the night before, so say I'm going to have to change my tyres. That takes me at least a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And so Alf came out with a jack and pretended we might be coming in, and so they didn't really speed up for quite a few laps after the halfway. Anyway, I'm going around and the front tyres start to wear. And as they wear, you get these lines that move across. Then when you go past that, it's of course like a tread, like a slick and nothing. Then you break through and you get to canvas. Now canvas, is, of course, is white, and you see these white spots will appear. And they're going around like this, and the spots then grow until they become lines. And I've got these lines going, you know. I'm sitting there watching this here. Here I am leading a race, no way should I be leading. And I thought, well, I can't stop. I mean, I've just got to carry on with this thing. And I was going around the corners, and they had very nice chamfered curbs there. And so I could go around a corner fairly slowly, and then go up on the thing and cool the tyres a bit on the grass. And so I was doing this as we went round, and Alf was giving me sort of misleading pit signals, which was all organised, and these white things became lines. Now when you go past the lines, it then gets to the point where you break through canvas, and so canvas starts coming up. Canvas is all fuzzy, and that was a bit disappointing to have that happen, particularly really reasonably early. And anyway, I went on, and the damn thing, when you get to canvas, of course, it just starts as one little spot, and they flash round, then it gets to a line, and then the line gets wider, and these two tyres here, I could see them, of course, and I mean, I was in a difficult predicament. I don't know if it's bravery or stupidity, which are pretty closely related, but I did consider stopping. I thought, no way am I happen to be winning this important race. Anyway, it went on like that, and in the end, with the things worn right through to, you know, to the canvas, I came in and managed to win it.
So you won Cooper's first Formula One race.
Yeah.
I don't think it's unfair to say that you were one of the leaders in the situation where Grand Prix cars change from having the engine in front of the driver to the engine behind the driver. Yeah. But what not everybody knows is your quite incredible versatility. You didn't confine yourself to Formula One, you didn't confine yourself to single-seaters. You drove sports cars with great distinction, and you started off in what I can loosely call sports cars with Jaguar in an XK120 when you were, can you remember how old you were then?
I think I was 18.
18?
Yeah.
And you drove that in very unusual circumstances because it was Tommy Wisdom's car, wasn't it?
Oh, you mean in the Tourist Trophy? Yes.
Yes.
Tommy Wisdom had been offered a giant Jupiter or something. He said to me, look, I've got a giant Jupiter I'm driving, because in those days you couldn't buy XK120s. They were all going to America for export. And the only people who were allowed to buy them were people like press, and Tommy Wisdom was the press guy. So he said, look, I've got an XK.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but were Jaguar not anxious for you to drive one?
No, I tried to get a drive with every company going around. They all thought I was going too fast from my experience, and I was going to get killed. And if I got killed, they didn't want me to kill myself in their car, which I suppose makes sense.
So who had this distinction at Jaguar of turning Stirling Moss down?
I mean, I didn't only try Jaguar, boy. I tried the whole. I mean, I even went, to MG and people like that. Said, "Can I have a car?" Yeah. Nobody would lend me a car, except for Tommy. And Tommy said, well, I've already got a car, Jupiter, so if you want to have the XK120, you can have it. And of course it rained, I think, nearly the whole thing. And the XK120 was really a really well-balanced car when you consider, we're talking so many years ago. And of course the brakes at that time, we hadn't got the disc brakes, we were developing them, but I hadn't got the disc brakes, I don't think, in that race. And the ordinary brakes in the wet, of course, were not too bad. I mean, in the dry, you would get brake fade quite badly. But when it's wet, everything's the road holding and braking power is considerably reduced. So therefore, it, got through all right.
And you won the race?
Yeah. I was, I'm not sure I wasn't 21. Anyway, I was fairly young, and it was in a borrowed car that he lent me. The factory, wouldn't let me drive.
So from XK120 to the fabulous Jaguar C-Type and the fabulous, well, you may not think so, but the fabulous Jaguar D-Type. What about the C-Type? What races did you drive in? How well did you do? Who were you racing against?
Oh, the C-Type was a lovely car. I mean, really, the C-Type was a much nicer car on a difficult circuit, say like Nürburgring. A C-Type would be quicker than the D-Type. The D-Type was built with one thing in mind, to win Le Mans, which they did. I mean, it was incredible. But the C-Type was a much more driver-friendly car. And I raced quite a few races, Reims, and well, just about anywhere. I mean, I was racing, don't forget then, I think probably nearly as much.
Including Dundrod?
Dundrod,
yes.
Yeah. Dundrod was a very difficult circuit, a great circuit. And of course it was wet
How do you see the atmosphere in motorsport at big meetings now like Formula One in comparison with the atmosphere that existed in your day? Better, worse, different?
I think less people at the race circuits.
In your day?
Yeah, I think, and particularly at the first TT, because it was pouring with rain, and the Irish are very keen, but I mean, obviously it did keep quite a few people away, which I must say helped me quite a bit, actually, being in the wet, because I happen to, I enjoy driving in the wet, but not as much as, I mean, I'd go around bitching about it.
I think of you, Stirling, as the first really professional driver.
Yeah.
There's maybe a scurrilous story that every time you landed at an airport, you were met by a BP representative with a brown envelope in his hand. True or false?
No, not. They did pay
the
bonuses.
white envelope.
You had to win first before they give you the money.
Oh, right.
So it would
Well, I want you to brace yourself now, because I want to talk about the V16 BRM.
Yeah, probably the worst car ever.
Of not so happy memory to you. It was Stirling. It was a great concept. Raymond Mays and Peter Berthon got this idea of getting the British motor industry as a whole to pull together and all supply appropriate items from whatever they did to make a racing car with this tremendously advanced V16 engine. But you got called upon to test it, didn't you, at Monza? What were the circumstances there?
Quite extraordinary. I've been testing it, and this is a car which, remember, we're going back so many years, 12,000 revs. Nobody got anywhere near that. I mean, Ferrari would be doing 7.5 maybe. And they brought this thing out, and it was really positively the worst car I ever drove. It had, I think, about 5 universal joints to get round the gear. There's one over here, of course, but there's so many universal joints to get round the engine that you had an enormous amount of slack. I mean, you could at least that much before you I mean, if you're in a corner like this and you're holding it with the right hand and it broke away, you had to get to here at least before you'd even pick it up. So it was not an easy car to drive. Lovely gearbox, good brakes. But the thing is, you couldn't stop it because it handled so badly. It wasn't very nice.
Why, in your opinion, did this great idea fail?
Well, I think first of all, because they had the wrong sort of supercharger. I'm not very technical, but it didn't have. It had this enormous 70 pounds of boost, I think, and which of course meant you had to let the clutch in at 9,000 revs. And then once it bit, the damn thing would snake like hell. I mean, it really was awful car. I mean, you got a tremendous amount of kick in the steering. And I remember saying to Peter Berthon, the chief engineer, I said, I'll get on the back and I'll take you around the pavé corner at Monza, quite slowly, in about 30, 40 miles an hour, and you'll see how bad it was, because he'd asked me whether the wheels were going like that or like that. Well, I couldn't tell the difference, actually. It was so bad. Then they brought it out then once, and then they brought it out with a red, white, and black, or red, white, and blue rev counter. I come down, and this is after we'd been there a long time, and they said, we've got this new rev counter to try. And they'd taken all the numbers off, and there was a white band in the middle, red here and green here, whatever. He said, keep it in the middle. Of course, it wasn't as easy as all that. And I mean, it was the drivers, the designers obviously didn't realise that you need power low down right through because they're having to let the clutch in so high.
What sort of a? I never met Peter Berthon. What sort of a chap was he? Was he difficult? Was he obdurate? Because if you're giving him all this good advice and he's ignoring it, or something.
Yes, they didn't take much notice of the driver. But no, I must say, they were Fred Carno's circus there. Terrible. I mean, we went to Monza, we were there, I forget how long now, a long time, and just trying to get the thing right, and it just never came right, really. I mean,
what would you, if you had been in charge, what would you have done to try to put it right?
Get another engine, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it really yes. was. The engine was a fantastic thing, what it would do, but having such a narrow rev range and such bad, you get cars with a good racing car should be very receptive to the throttle, and that's what this wasn't. Of course, it was on or off more or less, so it wasn't nice.
We're talking about the BRM because we have one in the museum, which is now being restored at great cost, and hopefully it will run much better than it did when Stirling was driving it. We also have one of the Tom Walkinshaw Le Mans Jaguars here, but something that you drove not very often and not very long, but it was successful in a Grand Prix, was the single-seater Connaught. Do you have any memories of that? Because we've got one of them here.
My memory, the first memory I think was it was given over the PA at Goodwood that Tony Brooks had won this I think the Syracuse Grand Prix, which was terrific, tremendous thing to do, and because he was the first Englishman driving a car like that to go out and beat the rest of the field, and so it really. I drove the car on a couple of occasions, not that much. Very, very nice car. It was handled well balanced and so on, but obviously really not quick enough as it was with all our cars at that time.
When you were a child, going back a bit, Stirling, when you were a child, did you have this burning ambition to be a racing driver? How did it happen?
I read Prince Bira's bits and pieces, or challenged me to race. No, that was Mike Hawthorne.
And interrupting you, we have a picture of you in allegedly one of Prince Bira's ERAs in the display here. Oh. It's actually a cardboard cutout, but
yeah, it's very good. But now, sorry, what was your question?
I forgot what the question was actually.
I've lost the page. Anybody know what we
were talking about the Connaught and your comparative lack of it.
One thing I must tell you when we were on the BRM. The BRM was, Raymond Mays was the founder of the whole deal, yeah. And Peter Berthon was meant to be the brains, and but Raymond Mays' mother, who was about in her 80s, I think, wore nylons with seams and all that sort of thing. She was a fairly weird guy, but she didn't really like Peter Berthon because he was going out with, and I suppose romantically, actually with Raymond Mays. Yeah. And she was the scene now is she's upstairs in Eastgate House, and a car pulls up, and a lady gets out. And after the lady's gone away, she said, called down to a mechanic there. Was that Mrs. Berthon? And so he said, yes, ma'am. So then the scene changes, and she comes out from Eastgate House with a flip gun. She goes inside the car, and then walked off and left it because she couldn't stand him.
Let's bring a smile to your face now. Then we've talked about Jaguar, we've talked about BRM, we've talked about Connaught, but surely some of your happiest years must have been with Aston Martin, because you drove for them for a long time with great success. Yeah. Tell us about them.
Well, Aston Martin, first of all, had John Wyer as a team manager, who was a good team manager. They built, the cars were, at the start, they were quite difficult to drive because they had quite a bad flat spot. But then they put us onto petrol. became the fuel. And with the petrol, it was much easier to get rid, so they got rid of the flat spot. And the car, of course, handled very well. Nice handling car, bit heavier than we want, but that's always like that. And at Nürburgring, which is the place one always thinks about, because it is certainly the greatest closed circuit race circuit, track. It handled very, very well. I mean, it really was a nice car to drive.
You were a jack of all trades and master of all of them in racing car terms. Can you differentiate one Aston from another? You drove a lot of them. Which did you prefer?
I'd have a job to differentiate the DBR1 with the DBR2, I think. But the point is, it's the evolution. Of course, you come out as you're driving whatever car it is, and you get into the thing, and you develop it with the mechanics. And you say, look, I'd like a bit more oversteer, a bit more understeer, and they would try to get the car the way you want it, that's to suit yourself. And that would go for anybody. I mean, wherever you're at, however much your skill is, you drive up as close to the limit as you can. And the Aston Martins were really pretty nice at that.
What about Le Mans? Was that the race that appealed to you, or did you regard it as something you had to do?
I thought it was horrible. When I signed a contract, I'd always sign it excluding Le Mans, because I knew people coming along offer more money anyway. But it's a race I didn't like. I mean, it's a race you go out. I mean, now I think it's incredible. I mean, the cars are so reliable, but then they weren't. And you take it carefully with your car. Your co-driver go out with it, and you come in and say, look, the brakes are a bit shot. It's pulling to the right. It's not that good. And so because I personally would not drive 24 hours non-stop on my own. Obviously had to share it with somebody.
Oh, sure.
And I never really liked it. And I think 24 hours in those days, you couldn't race 24 hours. You just drive as fast as you realistically could, but you wouldn't be racing.
I commentated on the '59 race when Carroll Shelby and Roy Salvadori won for Aston Martin. But am I right in saying that in '58 you were well up and had to retire?
I had to retire once, I think, when I was second.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the problem was.
We have in the museum a Michael Schumacher Ferrari. You have driven all sorts of Ferraris. You've never actually driven a Formula One?
No. I mean, my arrangement with Ferrari, I had a row with Ferrari because he told me to he'd meet me in one thing and another, and I went to the.
When was this?
Oh, this would be in the early 50s.
Yes.
And wanted to speak to me. And anyway, to cut a long story short, he wasn't there for the meeting and so on, and so I sort of think that's it now. And I would not drive Ferraris. I'd try and beat him with the opposition, which was Maserati or Fanwood or something. And that's the way it stood till the end, until, ironically, just before my big crash at Goodwood on Easter Monday, I had a call from Ferrari, would I go down and see him? And I went down to see Ferrari, kissed on each cheek, all made up, and have a cup of coffee and all this. And he said to me, would I drive for him? I said, I'll drive for Ferrari if you paint it Rob Walker blue and the white noseband, and then I'd like to drive for you. And he agreed. And he actually did make the car and delivered it. I never drove it. You were
doing all this through an interpreter, presumably, were you?
Yeah, we must have been. Yes, I'm sure his secretary or PA or somebody. Yeah, it must have been. I mean, I met him face to face.
Were you doing all your own, or making all your own decisions and doing your own management?
With Ken Gregory. Ken Gregory was a friend of mine who'd worked at the RAC and one thing and another, knew quite a lot of people and things, and so. But in conjunction with him, yes, yeah, didn't have anybody else.
Well, what I'm most interested in your career is your association with Rob Walker.
Yeah.
Because you insisted for year after year after year on driving only British cars, when it was very much to your disadvantage to do so. And some of your glory years, many of your glory years, were with Rob Walker. How did you find him? How did it start? How did it progress?
Well, Rob Walker was it's best said with on his passport, where it gave it where he made his money, just put down a gentleman.
Gentleman.
Which I think really summed it up. I remember going to him and saying, listen, can we go to the race in Argentina? And he said, just ask Alf Francis. If Alf agreed, because he was my race engineer, then we could go, which of course he did. We went, and it was successful. But Rob was, he actually had his air. He used to fly before the war. I think he flew in the war actually, but certainly. And he went along the Thames and going over one bridge and down under another one, and they took his license.
And allegedly, not allegedly, actually, drove at Le Mans in a Delahaye, I think, wearing a lounge suit.
Yes, that's right. When it comes to 6 o'clock, he'd come in, and that was because you don't wear brown shoes after 6 o'clock. So you change your shoes, and off you go, you know. And they called him in just before the end of the race, you know. And he said, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he said, look, you did such a great job, Rob, we thought you ought to share in the champagne. And so he had a glass of champagne and then finished the race after. They were undergrads, you know, who had this team.
Rob Walker was an immensely wealthy man because of his Johnny Walker.
Not actually, as far as I understand, not anywhere near what people think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, he was...
Well, he must have had a bob or two.
Oh, yes, he had a bob or two and so on, but I didn't have a contract or even exchange of letters. No, we didn't need that at all. I just drove for him and that's it. And he'd just sort of say, and he put me on to Alf for certain things, as you know, and that's it. So Rob was a fantastic guy.
Can you see a situation now, Stirling, like the one that existed in your day, where you had a top driver driving for a private individual who running his own team? Can you see that happening?
They're not allowed to now. Yeah. If there was a Rob Walker around now, I think I'm right in saying they wouldn't allow him. I think you have to be a manufacturer in commerce of the car you're driving, I think.
Yes, I think you're right, actually. So let's move on to Lotus. I think of you with Mercedes-Benz, I think of you with Van Moor, I think of you with Jaguar, I think of you with BRM, but maybe most of all I think of you with Lotus. First of all, what did you make of Colin Chapman and his products?
He got no sense of humour because I happened to win the American Grand Prix in '61 with my Lotus, and they made me a birthday cake because it was my birthday, and they gave it to me, and the first thing I did was cut the front wheel off and gave it to Colin, which he didn't think it was funny at all. I thought it was pretty hilarious. No, but he was a brilliant engineer. His cars, the Cooper was a much nicer car to drive, much more user-friendly, not as fast. If you had the capabilities and the expertise to drive a Lotus on the limit, it would be faster than the Cooper on the limit. But the Cooper was very much easier to drive, and therefore doing 3-hour Grand Prix, which they were, of course the Cooper was really, in many ways, a better car.
Contrast John Cooper with Colin Chapman. What sort of...
John Cooper was jolly good sort of blacksmith by comparison. John, I don't think ever would do a drawing other than sort of rough things, sort of saying, well, that's what we're going to do. Because he sort of took the front hinge of a Fiat 500, wasn't it? And put two ends together like that and came up with a car. And that's the sort of thing he could do. Very much a practical guy. And that meant, actually, when you finish, you've got a really nice, well-balanced car that's easy to drive, which is important. It's much easier to go on difficult circuits with an easy car to drive than a difficult one.
And what about the Lotus 18? Because that's, what I'm coming to now is two of your many great victories, Monaco 61, Nürburgring 61 in the Lotus 18, when you were up against, as a private individual driving a privately owned car, which was actually a year out of date,
Yeah, they wouldn't sell us, neither Cooper nor Lotus would sell us the latest model. So we had to wait until, till we got a second-hand one.
And did that never depress you, the fact that you weren't able to, because of your insistence on driving?
No, because the incentive to go out and try and beat them with last year's car was sufficient to give you a good laugh, you know? I mean, to beat Lotus or Cooper with their latest machine was obviously easier than doing it with last year's. But having said that, it's more fun if you can say to them, why did you bother to build a new one with the old one?
Yes. Well, I must hear from your lips your story of the 1961 Monaco Grand Prix when you were up against Phil Hill, Richie Ginther, Wolfgang von Trips, all of them in works Ferraris, and you're in last year's Lotus 18.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Well, I think that was the year when I'm at the start line, before you go up, I'm looking at the cars one does, and I looked in my Cooper, and I thought I saw a crack. And so I called Alf over and I said, I think we've got a fracture in the chassis.
Crack in the chassis?
Yeah. And he said, yes, God, we have. So they brought up wet blankets and God knows what and put it all around because it's down here. And people assumed, I think, he was probably got to do it electrically. Well, we hadn't got electric welding, so he came and lit up his acetylene torch, and people pulled back like this because we'd still got all that fuel on. I'd got fuel for the start, so I've got 40 odd gallons in there, and people just really realised what was happening. But I mean, the race to me, I mean, every lap I could go round and I'd see the guys, and it was.
You got away quickly? Did you take the lead straight away at the start?
Yes, I think I did. And I think I actually had pole, I believe. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that it were 100-lap races in those days, and I got pole position. But if I'd done the race at the record, at the speed I qualified, I'd have only been 40 seconds longer for the whole 3 hours, or 3 3/4 hours.
And they were taking it in turns, were they not, to try and push you?
Yeah.
One would keep on trying, and then he'd give up and let somebody pass.
Yeah. I mean, it was Richie and Phil, I think, and they give Richie, go fast, I think, catch up and so on, and which was great. I enjoyed it because, of course, you can see the other driver quite often on the hairpins and so on, and I'd sort of see him and just wave, as though it's an easy day out and I'm going as hard as I bloody well can, but I didn't want them to know.
What about the Nürburgring, the German Grand Prix? Because it's still the same Lotus 18, it's still last year's car, you're still up against the Ferraris.
Yeah, well, the thing about the Nürburgring, of course, is what you've got to try to do is lead when you go from behind the pits, because you go off and go round, not on the modern circuit, but the old one, a small one. Then you come round here and then go off into the hills, if you like. And it was important to try and be in the lead there, because if you get in the lead there, then you can really make up a lot of time. And then of course you come to the finish straight, which is a long straight, quite a long straight. I mean, must be nearly a mile. And my car was quite a lot slower than theirs, but luckily I managed to do it.
Cooper 500s, sports cars, touring cars. We haven't talked about the fact that you drove a Jaguar Mark 7 with great distinction. Formula One.
The Jaguar Mark 7 was a bit of a problem because it's difficult to say. See, we didn't have seat belts. I never raced with a seat belt. And of course, with that, it got a bench seat. And when I asked Lofty England, could I have a proper seat? He said, we race what we build. I mean, yes, we race what we build. And no, you can't have one. So I had to put my leg out like this to stop myself being shot across. Yeah. So racing, you've got to realise that racing in those days were very amateur. I mean, you could get to talk to the head man and all that sort of stuff. And it was a lot more fun. You were driving in event after event after event, weekend after weekend, non-stop in first this kind of car, then that kind of car.
How did you keep fit to do all this?
Well, interesting enough, I never did anything to keep fit because I found that if you're racing, and I was doing 52 races a year odd, if you're racing every week, which we were, you don't need to. It's like playing football. If you're playing football all the time, you don't need to get fit. And therefore, I was really very fit, but just for doing, you know, what I had to do.
Well, also in your quiver of achievements is rallying.
Yeah.
Driving for, of all cars, Sunbeam, and you won 3 Alpine rallies, and you won the Gold Cup as a result. Have you still got it, incidentally, the Gold Cup?
Yes, I think I have.
You think you have?
I'm pretty sure it's in the safe.
Oh, it would be. But what attracted you to rallying, and how?
50 quid actually.
Oh, which was a lot of money in those days.
I remember going up to Pete and Mike together, you know, after my first Alpine, and said, you know, listen boys, if you like, I've got somebody who's going to pay us to go down to south of France. We can troll around there, look at the crumpet, this, that, and the other. Then we do 5 days in the mountains, and that's it. And I get you 50 quid each for that. And the 50 quid was, you know,
yes.
That's about 1,000 quid a day, must be.
Did you enjoy rallying, or did you regard it as a bit of a chore?
No, I enjoyed it. I mean, because sometimes in rallies I had to drive damn fast. And I mean, the Sunbeam Talbot was a heavy car. It had got one of these extraordinary, what you call gear levers, you know, off the column, which was just as well actually, because you had to, in those days, for some ridiculous reason, you had to finish in the event that you go into, like the Monte Carlo rally, with the car as it was when you started. And unfortunately, mine wasn't. Mine actually, I had lost a gear. And somebody had heard this, and they told the commissar, and he came up to me and said, I understand, you know, I'd like to take me around and show me you have got 4 gears. So I had him beside me. So we go off, and I say, right, first, premier, you know, like that, and brought it into center, and waggled it around a bit, and pushed it back up into second, then back into third. And of course, I got an overdrive. Oh. And he couldn't see me do that, so I'd flick it and go into overdrive. And so there were 4 gears, which I hadn't actually got. So sort of cheating a bit, but.
Sterling, I have to ask you, of all the drivers that you have driven against, and you've driven against some truly great ones, who did you respect most?
Fangio.
Oh,
certainly.
Because?
Certainly, Fangio in Formula One, I think, was the best driver in the world by a reasonable margin. The other driver that I would, if I was a team manager and wanted to have a driver to do Formula One sports car, I'd have taken Tony Brooks, who is the in my mind, is the most underrated driver. You know, that we know because we're enthusiasts, but the general public didn't know him.
I remember there was one occasion, and the memory is fading a bit about exactly where it was, but he was in a. No, he was in a Ferrari, and if he'd finished the race well, he would have won the World Championship. So.
Oh, that was Casablanca, was it? You're enthusiast. What have we forgotten? Which one? USGP.
And he something was wrong with the car, right? If we're talking about the same thing, something went wrong with the car. Some drivers would have said, well, the hell with it, and pressed on. He had the determination and courage, if you like, to come into the pits and check the car over, as a result of which he lost the World Championship. Were you ever in a situation where you were not happy about the car, but you pressed on, or would you have come in?
If it was in the race, I wouldn't have come in unless I thought something was going to break. I mean, if something went wrong, which would indicate that, then obviously I'd pull off. But normally I would.
You can get into a Formula One car now, and be involved in the most terrible looking accident, well, the most terrible accidents. Think of Robert Kubica, Canada, and others, and get away with it, absolutely scot-free. Would you have dreamt of taking the risks that they take now in your day?
Oh yeah, you take. I mean, when you're racing in a Formula One race, I mean, you're going to go as hard as you can to win it. I mean, there's no ifs or buts. I mean, you get your gear race, you get all the things right, the setup right, and all the different things about the car, and you work, with your engineer and get it right, and then when the race starts, you're off, and that's it. And you go flat out.
It never ceases to amaze me that your active racing career finished in 1962 when you had that terrible accident at Goodwood. But you are still Mr. Motor Racing as far as the British public and a lot of the world is concerned. Looking back on your time as opposed to now, would you have preferred to live now in your time?
Only financially.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I wouldn't swap, no way. I mean, racing was so much fun. I mean, what you've got to realise is every time I got into a race car, there were obviously a few exceptions where the cars were bad or something, but in principle, I mean, it was something I really loved to do. And to get out there and take a car and drive it beyond the limit it wants to go to and yet get away with it is part of what the fun is.
Marvellous. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to throw it open to you now to ask questions, if any of you have any questions. It's not very often that we've got the great Stirling Moss in front of us. If you have a question, stand up. We've got a roving mic, Doug.
Gentleman there, up there.
It's always, people are always reluctant to ask the first question, but...
So Stirling, what was the secret to your Le Mans type starts? Because I mean, you were always first away. Was there some trick you had or a knack?
No, the only trick I had was two things. One was I'd practice. It's terribly important to practice. When you run across, I was actually a sprinter at school. I could do the 100, well, it was yards in 10 seconds, so I was quite quick. And also I was always, down ready to go in that sort of position. But to run across is only one part of the problem. The problem is that when you get into the car, what are you going to do? You can leave it in gear and out, and with the handbrake off, depending obviously if there's any camber or anything, so you've got the, or you can get in the car. The important thing is, as you get in, is your feet go down, one onto the clutch if you're leaving it in gear, or if not, then you just get in as quickly as you can with hand onto the start button, the ignition thing. And it's just a case of trial and error, really.
Did you ever put your foot through the steering wheel?
No, it has been done. I didn't do that. It wasn't me. I think it was Duncan Hamilton, actually.
Yes. Who's next?
Did you ever have any desire to have a go at the Indianapolis 500?
Yeah, I'd love to have had a go at the Indianapolis. The trouble with all the bullshit of that race means you have to give up 4 weeks. Now, 4 weeks to me was at least 4 races which I had a good chance of perhaps winning. Whereas if I'd gone over there, you've got your rookie tests and all these different things. But I would love to have done, yes, in answer to your question. But my father raced there.
But you did the Monzanopolis thing, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. But
how did that come about?
Frightened the hell out of me. I'm doing 175 miles.
What were you in?
I'm in a thing
Red
called
Bull Special,
an Eldorado Special, which is an ice cream company, which means they take a 1500cc sports car chassis, put a 4.5 litre, 4.7 litre engine in the front, and then they say that's the way you go. And I mean, it was a pretty frightening thing. And I can tell you, I'm going around the banking because it's fast. I mean, you're talking of God knows how much. But I'm going around the banking, and I'm like this, at 175 miles an hour and about a yard or less than a yard down from the Armco, and suddenly my arms crossed. Well, I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong. And I can tell you, all I could do literally was put my foot on the brakes, close my eyes, which I did. Because I was sure I was going to go over the top, to tell the truth. And anyway, just spun to the infield and nothing, no problem at all, except the steering had broken.
Gosh.
So that really did frighten me.
Yes. But you've driven in many races of different kinds in America. Do you find the scene very different over there? It always seems to me, and I use the word advisedly, to be a lot more amateurish than it is in Europe, and therefore probably a lot more enjoyable.
Oh, I think I certainly enjoy racing in America, yeah, very much. But I mean, I enjoyed racing so much, the driving and depending on the circuits, of course, enormous amount. I mean, there was circuits that were much more enjoyable than other ones, and some that weren't. You know, uninteresting circuits. But no, certainly, I liked America as much as over in Europe.
Any more?
Did you actually ever compete against your sister?
Did I actually ever compete? Yes, I think, yes, it was the curtain raiser race, I think, at Sebring. And I think you'll find that I drove with Pat and Steve McQueen and Pat and myself, I think, with the team, only in a Healy Sprite or something, you know, so yes, I did.
What about the horses? Would you have competed against Pat on the horses?
Yes, but she was better than me, that's for sure.
Ah.
She was very good on horses. Well, my mother's the one who made me ride horses, and I didn't really like it that much. And then when my sister came along and learned to ride, then that took the pressure off me, because my mother would be with her at you know, horse shows, so I'd get off with the cars.
You come from a racing family. Your father raced. Your father raced at Indianapolis. Your mother competed, so it's obviously in the genes. But did you want to race yourself when you were young, or did you feel it was something you ought to do? Right?
Oh no! I mean, I read Prince Bero's book, or Chula's book, Roadstar Hat Trick, or whichever one, I can't remember which it was. And I thought, God, what a fantastic life that guy has. Incredible life, going all around Europe, being paid to race. Yeah. And, you know, you'd have the party in the evening and all local crumpet and everything. And it seemed to me that there was nothing that could be better than that. And John Heath came along, offered me a drive with, and Lance Macklin as well, actually, in the HWM. And an HWM, of course, was really a bits of this and bits of that, with a pre-selected gearbox. And he made, the car was called HWM, stood for Hersham Walton Motors. And had, you know, I mean, it was a good job he did, but it wasn't competitive. I mean, we couldn't beat a well-driven Ferrari or well-driven Simca.
But it was good enough to enable you to make a mark.
Yeah, exactly. It allowed me to go around learning and I learned at that time, you know, when you're going around, what you do, you look like this and wave at people. If you do enough waving, they wave back. Yeah. And then you hope that the organisers realise how valuable you are and pay you more starter money. So it all comes with a reason.
Right, I think we've got time for a couple more. Yes, sir.
If you were asked to run Formula One today, what would you change?
I'd call up Bernie Ecclestone, take the easy way out,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
No, I enjoy Formula One, I really do. I think it's terrific. No, I haven't really given it a thought, because it's never going to happen, I suppose.
Would you, for instance, do what I think needs doing more than anything else at the present moment? Spread a vast amount of money that is available around, yeah, so that the lesser teams like Marussia and sadly Lotus can take part and actually compete on a more level playing field.
Yes, I suppose I would. But,
or do you think the weakest ought to go to the wall, which is what I suspect Bernie would say?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that's a bit harsh. You know, I mean, the trouble is, of course, with racing, there's no way it's going to become cheap, and therefore, no way is an underfunded team going to succeed. Not often. And so I think, frankly, I'd probably leave it much as it is. I'd say.
What about downforce?
Downforce. Yeah, downforce, of course, is something I've never experienced. I mean,
I think aerodynamics are the bane of Formula One. You've got all these bits sticking out.
Yeah.
The most beautiful racing cars, in my opinion, were produced in your time and a bit later, when they were single-seaters without all these excrescences sticking around the side of them.
Yeah, it's true.
And if you're not an aerodynamicist these days, you're not going to succeed, are you?
Yeah, no. I mean, certainly very important thing.
One more, I think we've got, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes?
Who's the lucky person?
Thank you, Sir Stirling. Yes, you said that you thought the Fangio was the best. Could you enlarge on that, and is it possible to say about the attributes which separated him out, or is it something you can't quite put your finger on?
Well, to me, Fangio was the best Formula One driver going. I could beat him in sports cars, and I don't know why. And when I went and I asked him, you know, why he said he'd like to see his front wheels. And frankly, I mean, the front wheels are down there on all cars, you know, so I don't know what he meant. I really can't understand because I mean, he was in Formula One on difficult circuits, Spa and what have you. He was invariably the fastest, and I mean, and yet, where you could see his wheels, he was not. I mean, no two ways about it. So I can't answer it.
Thank you very much. That was very enjoyable, and it's lovely to hear someone talking about racing and using the word enjoyable so many times. That's really great. So the plan now really is for us to thank our guests, and then we'll let them move off to the museum and get ready for the opening. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.